Hey friends, so before you tune into this episode, I just wanted to give you a heads up. The story that we're about to share is incredible, but there is graphic details and could be disturbing. And so I just want to make sure we are here to share people's stories, to share the redemption, and it is beautifully hopeful at the end, but in the midst of it, there is definitely some graphic details. So I just wanted to give you a heads up. Make sure you are in the right space to listen to this one.
I grew up in Orange County, California, in a home that was both loving and broken. And my parents were functioning alcoholics. Even though I'd always felt taken care of, I was around chaos, but all the time, but it felt like it was normal to me. I remember thinking this pain is so severe. No one can say anything to me to help me. No one could possibly comfort me during that time except for God. I knew God was the only one that could help me in the midst of just this panic and fear of my mom leaving. I remember thinking, okay, I don't want to live this life of sin anymore because I don't want my mom up in heaven staring at me, watching me do these bad things. Old friend of mine from junior high, his name was Randy. Within a month, we were dating, and 8 months later, he proposed. And we got married in a small courthouse in San Antonio, Texas, just he and I. We built a beautiful life together. We had 2 boys, Noah and Jack. As I was getting ready, these heavy, heavy thoughts started coming over me, and that something was not right. Something was really, really wrong. When I had walked into the gym, that's when I saw Randy there with the other woman, and their faces and their reaction to me being there was fully obvious as to what was going on and them being in a full-blown relationship. So what I didn't know at the time was that Randy had already made up in his mind about how he would handle his mistakes. The night before, he planned to take our lives in our sleep.
Our meaning you, your boys, and your dad.
Yeah.
Welcome to the Broken to Build podcast, a refuge for authenticity. Each episode, you'll be reminded that our scars are the foundation of our strengths. You will feel seen, known, and loved as you find beauty in the brokenness while you build the extraordinary life you were created to live. Hey there, welcome back to the Broken to Build podcast. I am Lauryn DeLoach, your host, and we are so excited that you're joining us today. Today, I have Marcai Hemrick, and I'm super pumped. This is going to be, her story is probably one of the most interesting stories that we've had on so far, and the way that God has redeemed her and her story is just beautiful. So I just won't delay any further, but Marcai, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And this is super cool.
Yeah, we're so excited. So why don't you just start us off and just give us a little snippet about yourself, and then we'll kind of lead into your story that way.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm married to my husband, Rob. We have 3 children, Noah, Jack, and Reed. They are 15, 13, and 5. So I stay at home with my boys, and I'm homeschooling my 15 and my 5-year-old. My middle schooler, he goes to a charter school. So, just learning the homeschooling route. It hasn't been easy, but that's what I do for the most part. And I also podcast. And my newfound hobby is learning how to make bread. So I'm really into that right now.
Ooh, nice. I want to be into that. I don't have time to be into that, but I say that I want to be, so I just go to the place that makes sourdough and I buy their bread.
Hey, that's where I was 2 months ago.
Yeah, I love it. Well, we will just kind of jump right into your story. Wherever you want to start is great, and we'll just kind of get going.
Okay. Well, okay. So about myself, I grew up in Orange County, California, in a home that was both loving and broken. My parents were divorced when I was in 2nd grade. I do have an older brother. We had bounced back and forth, living with mom, living with dad. And my parents were functioning alcoholics. Even though I'd always felt taken care of, but dysfunction was always all around me. My extended family also struggled with drug abuse. So I was around chaos, but all the time, but it felt like it was normal to me.
Wow.
As I got older, I had very little accountability. My parents let me stay at friends' houses often, which meant I was largely left to make my own choices. And as a tween and teen, that didn't always lead down the right path.
I remember you sharing on your podcast, you said something about when you were with your dad, he would just be like, oh, just make sure you're back on Sunday. Like it wasn't even like a.
Yeah. I was left to my own vices. I stayed at a lot of friends' houses and got into a lot of trouble for sure. I did what I felt was fun and easy and, partying, drinking underage, experimenting with drugs, seeking validation in relationships. And that was my dad's one rule, just be home on Sundays for church. So church was just another routine for me. And it wasn't something that truly shaped my life at that time. Everything started to shift though when I turned 16. My dad introduced me to a personal trainer at the gym. And that's when I really started learning about health and fitness and nutrition, body composition and food. But at the time, there was diet fads that you thought were the way to go. And I remember vaguely the fat-free diet. I don't know if you ever remembered that when they came out with fat-free Ruffles.
Fat-free everything. Skim milk, fat-free, cottage cheese, I remember that.
Yep. Diet Coke with lemon and fat-free Ruffles was like health food at the time.
Yeah.
Around the same time my faith had started to grow, I was baptized in the ocean by Pastor Chuck Smith, which was so cool. And for a couple of years, I genuinely tried to walk with the Lord. But it wasn't before long until I drifted back into the party lifestyle and putting the world ahead of my faith. At age 21, that's when my world really shattered when I lost my mom suddenly to a brain aneurysm. My mom was my best friend, and I would go to her for everything. She was my comfort. She was my God for most of my life. And when I realized that she was going to die, I felt a fear. It was my worst fear that had come true at the time. And I remember thinking, this pain is so severe. No one can say anything to me to help me. No one can possibly comfort me during that time except for God. I knew God was the only one that could help me in the midst of just this panic and fear of my mom leaving. So I went to my church at the time. It was Saddleback Church in Lake Forest, California. And I joined a grief group. And in that grief group, there was a bunch of old people. And I remember thinking, well, yeah, this is natural for you to lose somebody at your age. I was 21 and it just felt off to me. Like, why am I in this group? But I did find support still. And I remember thinking, okay, I don't want to live this life of sin anymore because I don't want my mom up in heaven staring at me, watching me do these bad things. So my motivation was, I'm going to turn my life around for you, Mom.
Okay.
Shortly after that, it morphed into, I want to live for God. And he started to really work on my heart. And rather than going to the bar on Thursday nights, I was going to the college group at my church and just pouring into church and reading my Bible and truly walking the walk. And that's when I ran into an old friend of mine from junior high. His name was Randy. He had just joined the military. So neither of us were expecting a romantic relationship. I was still grieving the loss of my mom and trying to find my way, but God had other plans. Within a month, we were dating, and 8 months later, he proposed. And we got married in a small courthouse in San Antonio, Texas, just he and I. I wore a green dress. I'll never forget that. And I left California to start a new life with him in Arkansas. And over the next several years, we built a beautiful life together. We had 2 boys, Noah and Jack. His job brought us from Arkansas back to California for a short while. And we eventually landed in Cheyenne, Wyoming. If you've ever been, it's not much to see. It's pretty depressing there, to be honest, but
Right.
military life. So that's where we landed.
Yeah.
We bought our first home and we were so excited about that. And my dad ended up coming to live with us because we didn't have any family around. My dad had just gone through a divorce and we're like, Dad, come stay with us. We could use some family and around, which enriched our marriage because hello, free babysitter means date nights and all the things.
Was your dad a believer at this point?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
My dad was also advocating for a program called Celebrate Recovery in the local prisons there in Cheyenne, which was really, really cool. And we were doing a lot of volunteer work at our church. So we felt like we were definitely doing kingdom work within our home. Mm-hmm. After the next several months, I started noticing like small shifts in Randy's character and his behavior. And I was just kind of mental noting them, but not really like saying anything yet. But before long, I discovered the truth. And unfortunately, he was having an affair. When I confronted him, he wasn't honest at first, but I knew there was more to the story. Mm-hmm. And I played detective, desperate to understand, what was happening. On Monday morning at 4 a.m., I got woken up wide awake. And I was like, this is weird that I'm really so awake at this hour. He usually would go to the gym and work out before he started his work day. Mm-hmm. My dad being with us, I was like, great, I can go and surprise him at the gym because he always wanted me to join him there. And we just never did because of our schedules and me being home with the kids. But I thought this morning, I'm going to go surprise him and I could be back before my kids even get up for the day. And like I said, my dad was there. So it was like a perfect plan. But as I was getting ready, these heavy, heavy thoughts started coming over me and that something was not right. Something was really, really wrong. And I just started to pray and ask God to protect my marriage and give me, discernment as to what is going on. And so when I had walked into the gym, that's when I saw Randy there with the other woman, and their faces and their reaction to me being there was fully obvious as to what was going on and them being in a full-blown relationship. So all of my suspicions confirmed just by the look on their faces.
Hold on. Sorry. I'm going to interrupt you. What did you do at that moment? Like after you saw their faces, like what was going through your head? What did you do?
I mean, massive disappointment, but also confirmation as to what everything that was kind of like stirring in my emotions in my head and in my heart. And when I saw them, they looked like a deer in the headlights. They were like, oh my gosh. And they went into opposite directions. And I confronted them. I went up to him and I said, unbelievable. And then I went up to her and I said, stay away from my husband. And I left the gym.
Because you knew her.
Yeah, I knew her. They worked together on base. Okay. So she was also married with children, and we got invited to her children's birthday party a few months back. Okay. So yeah, I knew of her, and Randy had wanted to kind of do life with her and her husband. Mm-hmm. And that was part of the story I didn't share, but he wanted to like go on double dates and stuff. And I'm like, why are you pursuing a friendship with another woman? Like, I don't like contact her husband, like talk to him, not her. Yeah. And so those were some of the character and red flag things that I was noticing.
Yeah.
And he just kind of played it off. But mind you, a huge piece to this story between Randy and I was he was a very pure man when we got married, if you know what I mean. And I was the opposite. I lived this promiscuous life and had a lot of boyfriends and partying, and he was the opposite. Yeah. And so when we got together, I felt honestly unworthy of such an amazing man. And so I never, ever thought in a million years that Randy would ever cheat ever. It just wasn't in his nature. It wasn't his character. It wasn't who he was. Yeah. He was a man of integrity. He was the most responsible man I had ever met. He really walked the walk, and people in his life would come to him for prayer, for advice. He was just an all-around really solid guy. And for me, coming from such a broken background in life, when I married Randy, I felt so safe. I'm like, wow, he's so stable. He's so normal. His parents are still married. They live in the same house, where I lived in like 9 different houses in the same city. So like, it just very different people coming together with different backgrounds. So I was like, he's my safety net, and I had him on a pedestal.
I was just going to ask that. Because it was kind of similar to my husband and I. Like, I was the party girl. He was very much like, just straight laced, like, relationship with the Lord. And I was raised in a Christian home, but my testimony is somewhat different. And so I was going to ask you if that played into your relationship at all with the having someone, because I know for me it did. Like, it was like, oh, I'm not worthy. I should, like, he should be with someone who doesn't have my testimony or a past, or, someone better suited for ministry, or, all the things. And so I was going to ask you if that played a part in your marriage.
It did. I felt very unworthy. I felt almost like dirty and just not good enough. But the Lord did a work in my heart, and it turned into gratitude. Look what I'm providing for you. Look what I've given you. I've redeemed your past, and you're a new person. And so I really felt that. Honestly, when we got settled into our first home that we had bought in Cheyenne, I remember specifically sitting on the couch looking at our wall of all of our family pictures, and Randy caught me smiling, just staring at our photos. He goes, "What are you smiling about?" I'm like, "I'm so thankful at what God has done in my life. I felt so unworthy for so many years, and look what he's blessed me with. I'm just in awe of his goodness."
Wow.
And honestly, I think that was during the time frame of him being in an affair, honestly, looking back, which is really, really sad and unfortunate. But on Friday night, everything unraveled. He finally confessed the full extent of his betrayal, and I was just beyond devastated.
So you went home. That was Thursday morning when you caught them at the gym?
Monday morning.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was like detective that whole week. And okay. Yeah. And then everything came to a head Friday night. Okay. Yeah. So what I didn't know at the time was that Randy had already made up in his mind about how he would handle his mistakes. The night before he planned to take our lives in our sleep, he believed it was
our meaning you, your boys, and your dad.
Yeah.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
He planned this out.
He premeditated. Yeah. He had messages on his phone that he recorded explaining what he was going to do and why. And he also was giving messages to his family and to his close friends. And he explained like everything. And I've listened to those recordings many times alone and in front of a counselor to process everything that he had said. But in those messages, he thought that this was the only way to make things right, was to not allow us to suffer the consequences of his sins. And he didn't want to be a hypocrite to the boys. And like I said, everyone had him on such a high pedestal that he couldn't fathom being such a big disappointment to everybody. And so he thought that killing us peacefully while we were sleeping was the answer. But being a believer, I know firsthand that this was spiritual warfare, and the enemy definitely came in and whispered lies to him. And Randy did admit that his relationship with the Lord was put on the back burner and he was just reading his Bible to check a box. And I noticed that, like, I did notice that in his character.
Can you hit a little bit on, because I know we haven't gotten to what happened yet. We're talking about like the premeditation of like he had planned to kill you guys. Can you speak to the power of shame in that? Because to me, that's what jumps out. Like, because I've lived shame, a lot of people have lived shame. But to me, is that a piece of it? Because that's what jumps out at me, like how powerful shame can be, and you'll do anything to fix it, to fix it in air quotes. Do you think that was a piece of it?
Absolutely. Again, so going back to Randy specifically, when he was in junior high, he got caught being a middleman for a marijuana deal. Okay. He wasn't the one actually making the money. He was just like giving it to the person, but he got caught red-handed. Okay. And at that time, that was a huge deal. He got expelled from our school and he got sent to a very small Christian school, a very small Christian school. And the look on his parents' face and the shame that he felt in that time of his life was life-changing and devastating. And I honestly think that switched something in his brain of like always carrying like that shame and that guilt. Yeah. But it did morph him into I guess his spiritual life, his spiritual walk, because going to a small Christian school, that's when he really changed his life around and was like just an extra solid guy. He never got in trouble ever again from that point on. And Randy was so strict, so disciplined. And I think that that just weighed on him over the years. And then when he got caught in this affair, this was like beyond.
Yeah, magnified.
Obviously so awful that he's willing to murder his family. Right. So that we don't have to deal with his mistake. I mean, that is shame on a level that I can't possibly comprehend. Yeah. But again, I do believe that this was the enemy, the devil, really wreaking havoc on his heart and on his mind. And Randy didn't seek help. He went to church and he talked with his mom, but I don't think he really opened up and shared with anybody like, hey, I'm going through this and I need to get out of this. Can you help me? I think maybe narcissism, maybe there was, too much pride. I don't know, but he didn't reach out the way he should have. And he dealt with it alone and he was isolated, and that's enemy territory. That's exactly where he wants you, as alone in your own thoughts.
Yeah. And especially as men, it's hard. And if you deal with, I don't want to feel shameful, I don't have a safe space, I don't have a safe person to go to process this, because I'm going to let them down. They're going to see, behind closed doors. And that's really hard for a lot of people. So they deal with it in the quiet darkness by themselves.
Yep. So
I get it.
Yeah. So he took matters into his own hands, and that's one of the saddest parts about all of this, is that he knew the truth, and he knew that there were people in his life that loved him and would have came alongside him, but he chose to isolate and pull away, again, because of that shame was so deep. And that's just awful to think about. But he did reassure our marriage on those recordings, which is something I really needed to hear, because that was another component here of Was he unhappily married? Was there something going on with us? Why? Because that's the automatic thing that the other woman or the man goes through when they're cheated on is, what did I do wrong?
Right.
And he said in the recordings that he was very happily married and that I was an amazing wife and he loved me very much and he wanted out of this affair, but he didn't know how. He said he wanted it to end and he didn't know how. And I remember one Christmas, it was Christmas 2015. We were visiting his parents in California and he seemed really down when we went back to Cheyenne, like really down. And I thought it was just because he was back to the grind, the normal, the weather was awful. We're coming from beautiful Orange County to Cheyenne, Wyoming, where it's just dreary and dark and not pretty at all. It's depressing. And I thought that was why he was acting this way. Well, come to find out, it was because he was in the middle of the affair and he wanted to end it and he planned to end it when he went back, but he didn't because he didn't know how, apparently. And this other woman, by the way, she was known as the Black Widow on base because she had slept with several married men prior to him and after him.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So I think she had a lot of
influence.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To say the least. I'm not blaming her. It takes two to party. I'm not saying that she's all to blame, but she knew what she was doing.
So okay. So bring me back to that Friday night.
So, so he finally confessed the full extent of the betrayal. And what I didn't know at the time was that he had already made up in his mind about how he would handle these mistakes. So so instead of his original plan of taking our lives while we were sleeping, he ended up attacking my dad first, because after I had found out the details of their relationship, I had woken up my dad and I said, it's true, they're having an affair. And my dad got out of bed and went downstairs, I think, to call Randy's parents. Randy and I was going like, I was not handling it well. I was like yelling. I threw a glass mason jar and it shattered. I took a picture off the fridge and I ripped it and I threw it in the trash. And I'm like, how could you do this to me? And how could, and I brought up the fact that we had just gone on a marriage retreat through the military. That was a beautiful retreat. And we had an amazing time together. And I went upstairs to my bedroom to get my phone, where my kids were asleep on our bed that night. And I heard shuffling going on downstairs. Mm-hmm. And I assumed that the other woman's husband broke into our home and was attacking Randy because he caught on and he has PTSD and he had made several threats to Randy, and Randy was fearful for his life. So I thought that's what was going on.
Okay.
And shortly after, I hear my dad yell for me to lock the door. So I lock my bedroom door and I'm standing there and I hear someone run up the stairs and I hear one kick and the whole door frame busted open. And there was Randy standing there with our largest kitchen knife in his hand. And I'm like, I couldn't believe my eyes.
Right. Like, what's happening?
Like, is this for real? Is he really standing there with a knife? And I could tell he was like trying to go for my neck and he wasn't saying anything. And I like realized I don't stand a chance against this man. He was very strong. He was a military man. He was trained. Like, what chance do I have against him? And I remember going, Randy, please don't do this. I'll forgive you. Please don't do this. He wasn't saying a word. I just remember hearing him breathing really heavy. And I yelled Jesus's name as loud as I could 3 times because I didn't know what else to do. Yeah. And I landed on the floor next to my bed and I held my breath and I pretended like I was dead. And he was standing over me, looking at me. And I thought I was going to die, to be honest, because of where he cut me on my neck. There was a lot of blood that was coming out and filling up my mouth. And so I thought he had hit an artery and my life was over.
Yeah.
And I laid there and I listened to him attack the boys. And that was
Oh my gosh.
beyond awful. And I know that even though amidst that horror, I know that God gave me this supernatural power because I did not get up to fight. I laid there and I listened to him, and I listened to my boys screaming and crying and telling their dad to stop and yelling, ouch. And I remember telling God, this is it. Here we come. It's over. And then Randy just all of a sudden stopped and he left. He fled the scene. And I said, get up. You're not dead. And I grabbed my phone. I told my boys to hide. And I remember having the hardest time dialing 911 because there was so much blood.
Yeah.
So much blood. And it was kind of dark in the room. And I grabbed shirts, as any article of clothing I could find to wrap around my boys' necks and around my neck. And I called the cops. And then after that, I had called Jackie, Randy's mom, and I had told her what Randy had just done. And the horror you can imagine the mom got after that phone call. And her and Larry, Randy's dad, they're in California. And they hung up the phone with me and they called Randy. And that conversation was recorded. And Randy was driving my car.
Who was it recorded by?
Larry's phone.
Okay.
Yeah. So I got to hear Randy talk to his parents and hear what he said. And he did not sound like with it at all. Like he sounded checked out. And he asked if we were alive. All of us were alive. And Jackie had told him, I don't know. And he said, I'm so sorry. I didn't know what else to do. He pulled off to a gas station. He handed his phone to a stranger and he told the woman to turn that phone into the police because that's where the recorded messages were that he had left on his phone explaining what his plan was. And he wanted that phone to get to the cops, to get to his family. Then Randy proceeded to drive my vehicle and he stalled in the middle of the highway. I don't know why the car stalled, but it did. I think he was planning on running it into oncoming traffic on the highway.
Okay.
And he got out of the car and he ran in front of traffic and got hit 7 times and his body dispersed into pieces all over the highway. And that's how he died. And he also wrote on the inside of my car, I tried, learn from this. I'm sorry. He wrote because I always would write messages on the car windows.
Yeah,
and so
yeah.
he used one of those one of those chalk things to write that. But yeah, prior to him attacking us, he was attacking my dad. It wasn't Jason that broke into our house. He was getting my dad and he got my dad really bad. And when we were waiting for the police ambulance to come and help us, I thought I was going to lose my dad because he was laying in the biggest pool of blood and he was not responding. And so that was really, really awful to deal with. And then not knowing where Randy was at the time. You know, there was this period of time between sitting on the floor and the ambulance coming eventually and working on my dad and the kids getting taken to the hospital. And I'm sitting there and I'm like, where's Randy? What's going on? Do they have him? And we get to the ER and they're sewing us up the cuts. And they said that they had him. And I didn't know exactly what that meant, but I flashed forward in my mind of picturing life with my children's dad behind bars and that living that life. Like, this is my life now. They're going to visit their dad in jail. But little did I know he was dead. So
when you talk about this, would guess partly because you've worked through it with counseling and therapy, but like you still talk about Randy with compassion, which to me is like such a godly, sometimes unattainable thing. Like there are people that I have less compassion for that didn't try to murder me. So like, tell me about like the compassion and love that did you ever go through a period of like anger and I hope he was dead because of what he did to me or my kids? Or was it always like worried? And if you don't want to talk about it,
That's the crazy part about my story is that that's the part people don't understand. They don't understand how I speak of him in the manner that I do. And it's because they didn't know Randy. And the ones that knew Randy, that wasn't Randy. That wasn't him. He was a genuinely amazing human being, one of the most amazing human beings I'd ever known in my life.
Yeah.
And so I know wholeheartedly that this was spiritual warfare.
Mm-hmm.
And we're all sinners.
Yeah.
And yes, this is huge. You know, the fact that he tried to kill me and my children and my father, it's unimaginable. But I'm more so sad and angry about him not being here to help me deal with the aftermath, because that's been honestly the hardest part, is navigating the afterlife, like life after all of this, especially with my boys. My oldest one, Noah, especially, he has struggled the most because he was 6 years old when this happened, and he remembers the most. He remembers what the cop looked like. He remembered what he ate for dinner that night. He remembers where the blood was on the walls. So there's all that. And they had a beautiful relationship with their dad. They loved their dad. They were daddy's boys.
Yeah.
So that part I get angry about. Like, man, what a shame. What a waste for the sake of an affair. And why didn't you remember the grace of God and forgiveness and turn to him and allow him to work this out? But, you know, we all make choices. And again, there's like that narcissism side of this too, where I'm like, I have to like try to realize like where he was and like the pride, you know, and not just saying, hey, I'm royally screwed up and I need help.
Yeah.
You know, instead he took it into his own hands. So,
yeah. Which when we do that with stuff, we end up messing it all up. It doesn't matter, like, however bad, when we take things into our own hands and don't give it to the Lord. So since then, the healing process, the counseling, your dad's okay.
My dad's so awesome. I love my dad. He's amazing. I'm very, very close with my dad. I love him to pieces. I see him every day, and he followed me to North Carolina, and he's going to be with me wherever I live until he goes home to heaven.
Okay, good. And then your journey after that with the boys, with you, like, what did that look like, picking up the pieces?
Not easy. Very, very, very sad. A lot of sad moments, and moments where I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to answer questions my boys would ask. I didn't know age appropriate. You know, my oldest still is waiting to hear the recordings that his father left on the phone, because he knows the full story. But I ask the Lord for discernment there, and I wait for him to give me confirmation. Okay, Noah's ready to hear those messages from his dad. You know, so it's just, it's so interesting to navigate as my kids have grown, because they go through different phases and different processing in their little minds and in their hearts, but I have seen God's hand all over it, all over the mess, all over the tears, all over the hardship, all over the confusion and struggles. His hand has been over us the entire time. And it literally brings me to my knees in awe and of thankfulness and just immense gratitude. And I don't know how anyone can get through this life without him. Truly, people had shown up in our lives to help us through this horrible time. Strangers, people I'd never even met before, provided things. Someone gave me a car when this happened. I don't even know who they were. They gave me an old Jeep, because my car I got rid of everything after this happened. I didn't want anything. I wanted to start completely new. We had the best of the best mental health care through Saddleback Church, and Rick and Kay Warren have helped us immensely in pointing us to the Amen clinics. That is incredible care. Wow. Noah's had 3 brain SPECT scans since the tragedy. So we've been able to see the progress in his brain through EMDR, through supplements, through medication. So we've gotten the best care that we possibly can, but it doesn't mean it's been easy. It's still hard. Till this very day. And I think it'll be that way until we leave this earth, honestly, because my boys have a lot of pain, and it's going to be messy, but we can get through it because we got God with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then you're married again. So tell me, after your first experience, how was that, like, getting romantically involved, dating, marriage? Like, was that traumatic?
Not traumatic. No. Okay. So let me go back. When my mom passed away, remember how I told you my mom was my God? So I would go to my mom for everything instead of going to the Lord. So when God took her home, I was like, okay, I don't have a human being. I am fully committed to you, Lord. I'm going to you for all my needs. And then Randy comes. And now there's a man who kind of meets, this security, this safety, this, provides for me in a way that only a human being can provide. But like I said earlier, I kind of put him on too high of a pedestal, obviously, and didn't think he would ever be capable of cheating and doing such a thing. Clearly, I was wrong. So after Randy had gone, God really did a shift in my heart and allowed me. I fully have surrendered to him as my husband, God as my husband, God as my strength and my everything. And I knew I was healed because I wasn't going to look to a man for certain things that they're not capable of doing. Does that make sense? Like I realized I'm not trusting man per se. I'm trusting God.
Absolutely.
So that opened up the opportunity for me to be able to love again and enter into a new relationship. Does that mean it's been easy? Heck no. It has been a journey from day one with my husband, but my husband is awesome. He chose us in the midst of this crazy dynamic and this, traumatized family. And my husband was a new believer, when we got married. And so he's still here and he's figuring it out with us. And it's not perfect. And it's so messy, especially with his relationship with the boys, specifically my oldest, but we're getting through it. And because we have God and we have his foundation as our, the path that we're on.
Yeah. Wow. So you have a story unlike most people's experience. What if you could pick out something that you have learned like maybe the biggest thing that you've learned from all that you've been through? Could you pick that out? Do you have one or two?
That God is real. He's real, and he's with you, and he loves you, and he's protecting you, even though you may not see it or feel it. 100%. Like I know that wholeheartedly. So I don't have like this fear of man or life anymore. Having a near-death experience and almost losing my children and my father and the love of my life, betraying me in such a way, I have like this steadfast assurance and faith in God and my future in heaven that is unshakable.
That's amazing. And I love the way that you put that. And thank you for just being willing to share your story. I can't imagine that that's easy, but thank you for your vulnerability, and your compassion is inspiring. Like, I'm like, oh man, I have to check myself, because there are people that have done less to me that I'm like, okay, bye. And so that's very inspiring. But I think it does come from a very healed place. Like, after you've been through the counseling, you've been through the therapy, like all of a sudden it's like, oh, you don't see them as like this horrible monster. It's like you have compassion that only God can give, really.
Truly. Yeah. I a lot of times I don't have an explanation other than just to say Jesus or God. Like, that's it. Cause it's not me, it's him doing the work in me, truly. And it makes me smile. Like I'm just like, thank you, God. I don't know how that just happened, but you're doing your thing through me. I'm a willing and able broken vessel, but he's with me. And I want others to know that God loves them very much. And he has a plan and a purpose for their lives. And not to mention, my life is such a gift, like that God decided he wasn't done with me yet. He wasn't done with my boys and my dad. What an honor. Yeah. Like, I don't take that lightly. Like, that's amazing. So what am I going to do with what I've been given? I've been given a second chance. So I'm going to spend my life, as messy as it is, I'm going to try to point as many people I can to Jesus.
I love it. Oh my gosh, what a way to end. You said it perfectly. So thank you again so much for sharing your story. This was amazing. Thank you guys so much for joining us on the Broken to Build podcast, and make sure you stay tuned for next week's episode.